while you need to have studied the original series to get why Korra's masterful bending at the age of 4 is a problem.
To be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to understand Avatar: The Last Airbender. The humor is extremely subtle, and without a solid grasp of theoretical bending physics, most of the jokes will go over a typical viewer's head. There's also Zuko's nihilistic outlook, which is definitely woven into his characterization. His personal philosophy draws heavily from Musashi Miyamoto's literature, for instance. The fans understand this stuff. They have the intellectual capacity to truly appreciate the depths of these jokes, to realize that they're not just cool, they say something deep about life. As a consequence, people who dislike Avatar truly are idiots. Of course they wouldn't appreciate, for instance, the meaning in Aang's existential catchphrase, yip yip, which is itself a cryptic reference to Musashi Miyamoto's epic, The Book of Five Rings. I'm smirking right now, just imagining one of those addlepated simpletons scratching their heads in confusion as Brian and Michael's genius wit unfolds itself on their television screens. What fools. How I pity them. And yes, by the way, I do have an Avatar tattoo, and no, you cannot see it. It's for the ladies' eyes only, and even then, they have to demonstrate that they're within 5 IQ points of my own, preferably lower. Beforehand, nothing personal, non-bender. Welcome back, guys. Second coming of Jesus Christ, Dr. Cross here.
Well, I don't think the second coming of Jesus would be living in his mom's house.
Baby, I'm trying to do something. Go away. Anyways, guys, how has everybody been? Before I begin, I'd like to address a couple of points that slipped my mind last time. So, a metal bender most likely simply couldn't crush another metal bender open. In the past, the one with the stronger bending won bending contests. Saying an evil metal bender could do that is like saying an evil water bender could have used Katara's water from the pouch to kill her. Blood bending was a different type of water bending, which is why other water benders weren't able to really protect themselves. Another thing that the metal armor protects against is chi blockers. Aang was a prodigy in terms of water and fire bending, becoming better than those teaching him, Katara and Zuko respectively, after just a few days, and his Earth Nation master and Water Nation master in days. Aang at age 12 was stronger than Korra at age 18. He had access to much more of the Avatar abilities and the elements, so while I said it makes sense for Korra to be stronger, she was in reality much, much weaker than Aang, making Mr. Enter's dislike of her being able to bend the elements in such a paltry way even weaker, since Aang was even more gifted than she was. The only difference that he had to learn the basics of some of the elements, and she started off with a basic grasp of the physical elements. Also, one sentence before complaining that Korra started off knowing some elements, you stated that it took years to master, and yet Aang learned it all in under a couple of months. Also, if you want to work off the show's own continuity and in-universe logic, a lot of the changes were made in the essence of balance. See, Avatar's most recurring theme is balance. In the original show, the elements are much more out of this balance. It makes sense that each Avatar is the opposite or complements the next Avatar. Think about it. Kyoshi was a stubborn, block-headed warrior lady who split the land in half instead of finding a peaceful solution. On the flip side, Roku was such a peace lover and hippie-style guy that even on the cusp of war, he still had trouble acting. He was patient, incredibly spiritual, in tune, and very wise. Aang was again nearly the opposite. He was childish, fun-loving, silly, not that patient if you go off of his earth training, and gets frustrated very quickly. Aang did the opposite of Roku, Roku did the opposite of the last Avatar, and Korra behaves almost opposite to Aang in every way. Looking into the subtext of the show's Avatar personalities, keeping it different from the original show actually further factors into how it fits continuity and is tighter than a nun's pussy. The point of having previous Avatars talk to you is to get incredibly different perspectives that are all opposite of one another to achieve balance. If they were all the same, what would be the point? Balance is the overall theme and followed to a T.
Much of Korra's training has her kept away in an isolated place from most of human civilization, to the point where she doesn't know what money is.
I disagree that this is a bad thing. See, Korra spent some time training with the masters of the various elements to learn how to battle before learning how to be political. They are still slightly fresh off of a war and a period of conflict, and the last Avatar had disappeared for 100 years before he re-emerged. So before sending her out as a possible major target for anyone who wanted to be sinister, they taught her to fight. Also, they knew that there were possible bloodbenders in the city as they had been attacked by one before, making it even more realistic to have Korra learn how to fight before learning how to be political. One cannot simply become a master at everything in the entire world in just 12 years. Before the beginning of The Legend of Korra, the anti-bender protests began. Bringing the Avatar to Republic City, whether or not it was to quell protests, would have erupted further racial divisions, which it did. This was due to two major sources listed in the season. One was the feeling of oppression from the triads and all the gangs of benders in the city. The other was because of foreign politicians running their city, all of these politicians being benders. It caused a great racial divide, and Tenzin was aware of this, which is why he went out of his way to try not bringing her. Keeping Korra with the Water Tribe to help master her skills and eventually learn her political skills would have been much better, because now she would have been able to defend herself from likely assailants and then also be able to learn airbending. They kept Korra locked away not just for her own good, but for the good of the people in Republic City. Literally, as a foreign avatar got to the city, events started to boil over. She also did know what money was, which is why she offered to pay them back. She, however, was used to getting everything for free because she was the avatar. Her father was also chief of the Water Tribe, so she wanted for nothing in multiple ways. If she hadn't been open to change, as you tried to argue, she'd have demanded it for free, as that's what she's always gotten.
And halfway through episode 1, it's very clear that Korra doesn't know how to people well.
What? I'm not oppressing anyone. You're oppressing yourself.
So no one has bothered to teach the Avatar any oratorical skills.
They have taught her oratorical skills, though, as seen by her ability to, figure things out as she went. But she is a 16-year-old girl in her first time in a new place getting verbally assaulted on the streets. Aang also said a lot of dumb things and made a lot of sass to people, and he was a monk. That just is something children do, so a child doing that isn't really out there.
I mean, that's understandable. She's just supposed to be a diplomat, a spiritual leader, a celebrity, a politician, a hero, a role model.
She's still in training for these things. She isn't as gifted as Aang, who was taught spirituality from a young age. Aang never really mastered diplomacy until near the end. Remember early in the series when he had poor social skills and got so swept up in being popular with the ladies that he hurt/abandoned his friends and common sense and even slightly lost track of the mission? He was raised by monks. Korra cannot be expected to be perfect in every single sense of the word at 16. It took Aang his entire life to get Republic City to what it was. Clearly not every decision was perfect. Avatar does not mean God. The Avatar should not be held to an impossibly high standard. This is strike one. I'll explain later.
But nah, talking to people, that's not in the job description at all. She just has to shoot shit with fire and wind, and everything will be okay.
You realize her lack of diplomacy skills contributes directly to the plot, right? Nobody wanted her to leave the training she was going through. Also, you can be trained in social etiquette all you want to be, but it's never going to actually show you how a real conversation will function. You can't have social skills from a book, and you can't know how to react to everything from someone telling you how. Another theme in Avatar is the Avatar learning through experience, which is something she needed to do.
It's strange when the writing has the exact same flaws as Korra herself, believing that being the Avatar is nothing more than fighting.
They make a point of showing why her lack of diplomacy skills hurts her and how it affects the city. She makes mistakes. The writing does not once have that problem. Her constant fighting literally gets her in trouble, in fact.
Then Korra gets into a fight, and I really want to point this out. It's minor, but I love how the first fight in the series goes. Korra is dressed like a waterbender. The first thing that they do is waterbend at her. Then, after they know that she's a waterbender, they firebend at her. And only then do they earthbend. It's like, what is this? The tutorial fight for the video game? Attention to detail. It's kind of important.
So this point is actually getting even harder for me to fathom than I thought. Okay, in a real combat, when multiple people attack the same target, it can actually make it harder for each individual target to perform as well as when they are individual. See, if the guy earthbended up a big ol' wall at the same time fire and water boys shot forth, those three attacks could conflict directly with each other. They might not cancel each other out per se, but it would become harder to have more direct control. They're smug gangsters. Of course the waterbender tries to prove a point. He gets knocked back, so the firebender, the opposite of water mind you, the natural victor in the battle of strength, makes an attack. Korra deflects it, and then an earthbender steps in. None of them expected her to block one attack, much less literally be the Avatar. In what world does it make sense for all the gangsters to have an instantaneously choreographed list of combo attacks to spam the second someone pisses them off? It literally only makes more sense being a few solo attacks that led up to them realizing they're fucked. The fact that a firebender originally moves to counter the waterbender is incredible attention to detail. Also, if you don't notice, there isn't formal wear in Republic City besides Tenzin, pretty much obligated to wear it. These gangsters are much younger and more likely to have spent their lives inside the city. It's entirely plausible they didn't recognize waterbender formal wear even from the northern or southern water tribes. Even in the sports, the benders didn't wear their respective colors. Hell, even formal wear had Asami in reds. She's not even a firebender. The fashion is much different inside the city and the outlying areas than it was in the original Avatar.
Actually, no, I take that back. They do pay attention to detail in some of the worst areas possible. During this fight, Korra vandalizes innocent people's stores and breaks up public roads.
You literally just got mad that they introduced the Avatar rules in this to be all about fighting to solve problems. Then when they immediately introduce that the rules have changed from the original Avatar and that combat won't solve everything, you get pissy. In the original Avatar, they fought to solve literally everything, and the only singular time it ever went wrong was that time Zuko had a really, really bad day. Korra tries to help and makes it worse. This literally establishes in the first episode, the first real fight scene, the slightly more political and down-to-earth nature of the series, and yet you think it's enforcing her using combat to solve everything? No, this is the world establishing on screen, in your face, that combat won't do everything. This weakens your earlier critique on how the writers viewed the Avatar to be written.
Then she runs from the police.
A police force she's almost entirely unaware of, who she tries to reason with at first. She tries explaining that she was in the right and that she's helping people. They say no, further enforcing the concept that the Avatar just can't fight to win, but still showing that the place is messed up enough to need to know how to fight. She tries to escape because she feels like they're perpetrating injustice. All the way up to the conversation with Lin, she believes she's in the right. This is not bad. This is called world building and character establishing.
During this chase, she plows one of the officers into a block of ice that she created, and she smiles about it. This is more or less the introduction to our hero. Even when Aang and his group were fighting some of the worst people imaginable, as far as I could tell, they didn't smile about it.
Well, yeah, when they were fighting the worst fears imaginable, they weren't smiling because they were in danger. When Korra is getting beaten by Amon and having her bending taken away later on, she isn't smiling about it. You're making a completely silly comparison between two things that do not have anything in common. Now, however, Aang just absolutely did do that though when he was fighting. In episode 2, when he's taken captive, right before he blows air to escape the firebenders who are marching him, he starts playing coy, then shoots air out of his mouth. Then in that same episode, he smiles as he shoots past a bunch of them. But if that's too loose, what about the time an arrow hits some firebender in the back and Aang smiles and says, "How'd you do that?" If that's not enough, what about the time Aang is fucking with the school bully, smiling at him when he plays him for a fool in front of all of his friends?
Nobody shows my Anji anything, especially movement.
Aang actually just smiles during combat a lot. To say he doesn't is you failing to notice detail in what you claim to be your favorite show. The entire rest of your rant about the smiling is now totally moot unless you also believe it was horrible when Aang did it too. Aang smiled at what could have been a firebender literally dying. Korra, on the other hand, is momentarily happy that someone fell victim to a simple trap she made. Again, she's just a teenager, no older than Zuko. Zuko made all sorts of irrational decisions based on emotions.
But no, Korra commits a crime, and then she resists arrest, and then she smiles as she assaults a police officer, and in the end she gets away with it. Tenzin takes the fall for her, and agrees to pay for it, with what I can only assume to be taxpayer money.
She believes the arrest was unjust, that she was doing her sworn duty. The Avatar can't be in prison, so of course Tenzin took the fall. And as far as taxpayer money, what? You do remember that Tenzin had an actual paying job, right? Okay, I think I got to explain how money works now. If Tenzin hadn't agreed to pay it off with his own money from his own actual job, then the government was going to have to. The actual taxpayer money was going to be used to fix it. Do you know who makes up 80% of the population? Non-benders. The non-benders are the majority of the taxpayers, and forcing them to pay for a bender's crime would only further segregate the communities. Again, you have to be able to look at a scene and understand character motive before you critique it. If this was meant to be a joke, fair enough. But it's blatantly false. As seen, even avatars need to pay for food, which means Tenzin needs money. He's a council member who earns money and volunteered to pay for someone else's problems to try stopping the divide. How did you not get that? That's literally the biggest reason why the cops aren't flushing out the gang members, because all the damage caused by the ensuing battles would come out of the non-benders' pockets, the only people losing in that situation. And Korra does get punished. She gets talked down to and lectured. Did you expect Tenzin to compile his robes, take in a deep monthly breath, and then punch her right in the mouth? What do you tell a Korra with two black eyes? Nothing. Tenzin already told her twice.
And then Korra is apparently fully justified in blowing up at Tenzin in the next episode for being too harsh and serious on her.
No, she's not justified to do that at all. That's literally the point of the scene. She rationalized it because she's frustrated with herself. The majority of the audience understands that she isn't justified in screaming and then sneaking off, which is why she gets in trouble.
I love Korra's line at the end of episode 1.
I saw a lot of the city today, and it's totally out of whack.
Oh boy, this is about to get good. This part right here, this is the reason I made the video. This coming point that he makes adds so many pounds of dumb to his argument that Atlas himself couldn't lift it.
Yeah, like you needing money to buy stuff, and it being illegal to fish in the park, and cops trying to arrest you after you vandalize shops and roads, and it's peaceful protests. And honestly, the city's a lot cleaner than any city of Republic City's size has any right to be.
It is amazing Truly astounding. The level of intellectual dishonesty going on here. Let's start with the money thing.
Yeah, like you needing money to buy stuff.
Money is a symbol of greed, something that the Avatar is meant to see through. Greed is an earthly, not a spiritual desire that separates mankind based on who has the most of a particular unit of currency. Money's not a natural thing, and in 2 scenes, Legend of Korra shows how it divides people. Greed is running the city, but that's not a very strong point. That was mostly a joke in the show used to show how accustomed she is to life in the Water Tribe, treated as a god. Your second point, however...
And it being illegal to fish in the park.
You went very far out of your way to cut out the interactions with the homeless man, who tells her how many people are homeless here, to show her cooking the fish. First of all, ignoring everything else wrong with this. Contextually, she was fishing because of her lack of money. How would she know that fish were off limits? She lived in a country literally built on water. Her city ponds and rivers were fishing joints. That is literally just a barrier of culture, and also shows on a subtextual level that the elements are out of whack. Man isn't interacting with nature as he normally would be. But that's not the point that I want to make. The point that I want to talk about is how you cut out the existence of the homeless man. See, in this scene, Korra finds a homeless man who tells her about all of the homeless people in the cities. She talks about how it's horrible, and the hobo is even joking about his bush. The city has a large population of homeless non-benders who aren't even allowed to sleep in the park they are trying to live in, but they can't go anywhere else. This is a children's show, so they make the hobo crazy and funny. How did you want it done? Did you want the hobo to be a sad mess of polio, Parkinson's, and depression? You went out of your way to not show one of the worst things she sees, rampant homelessness, yet rules that make being homeless impossible to deal with. You can't fish in the only fishing spot because it's illegal, so hobos just have to beg. How is it possible to be comfortable being so intellectually dishonest? I have literally no idea. This is strike 2. Again, I will explain later.
And cops trying to arrest you after you vandalize shops and roads.
In her mind, the cops tried to arrest her after she did her divine duty to bring down thugs and stop the oppression of the weak. She didn't realize she was making it worse, or that it was illegal for her to perform her duties. She acted on a moral level and was confronted with coldness and laws prohibiting her from doing what was right. The cops weren't stopping the triads, they couldn't contain the criminals. Them being thugs like that so close to the cops in the first place should have shown you how fucked it all was.
And it's peaceful protests.
The peaceful protests that verbally assaulted her for a crime that she doesn't think she's committing over a social issue she hasn't heard of. The fact that they have to protest at all literally shows that something is out of balance.
And honestly, the city's a lot cleaner than any city of Republic City's size has any right to be.
But it's also dirtier than any city or area ever put into Avatar aside from maybe the swamp. It's brown, dirty, has a ramshackled look to a lot of it. But you're right, it's prettier than a real-life city. Saying the city looks nice as a point is beyond daft. The city looking nice from the outside is actually one of the design choices. The city is grand and majestic, but fraught with political intrigue and horror. Like, literally, this design choice is straight up used in Lord of the Rings with the Two Towers and Harry Potter with Hogwarts itself. The nice looking city is meant to show the contrast from the outsider's perspective and the actual problems within. The homelessness issues, the cops being unable to stop gangs that rule the underground, the triads literally openly extorting people, the overthrowing of balance to the elements and nature set by the city laws, the cops not stopping the gangsters but instead arresting some henchman and then going after her for acting outside the law. These are all things that contribute to a horrible city. And in real life, whenever you're trying to make a city better, instead of trying to deal with the crime forthright, you work on making the city look better. Because if the city looks better, more good people will start moving in and more people will want to try and take better care of it. It's a renovation process. That is literally what happens in real life. You went out of your way to misconstrue every single thing you just said in the ugliest way possible. It's because money. It's because no fishing. It's because peaceful protest. It's because city is pretty. But in reality, it's the lack of balance, the rampant homelessness problems, the aggressive, peaceful protests that show there's a clear racial divide in the city, the gangs exhibiting their power over the meek, the cops being unable to stop them, the cops going after the Avatar for stopping crooks, not saying she was in the right, and Tenzin having to step in to make sure the taxpayers didn't have to cover the cost of damages. And I genuinely can't believe you didn't know this stuff. You had to have done it on purpose.
I suppose that brings us to the bender-non-bender conflict.
Yes, it does. This is the big one, guys. This is where he really starts going downhill. Now, frankly, I think the bender-non-bender conflict went over a lot of people's heads. Not to pull the Rick and Morty copy pasta back up or anything, but they did this conflict in a way that no other show or movie or book I can think of has tried. And most people didn't get it. I'm not saying this to be condescending, because I think it was the author's intent not to have most people understand it inherently. What do I mean by that? Well, first I'm going to need something to carry me through the rest of his video. Welcome back to Dr. Cross's cooking show. Today I'm going to teach you how to make Avatar ramen. The very first thing we're going to need is some oriental flavor, because Avatar is an Asian theme. And then we're going to go ahead and take a small spoonful of minced garlic for a little bit of flavor, because you really can't go too wrong with garlic. Maybe a little more if you want a little extra. So we're going to have to go down the proper elements, air, water, earth, fire. So to symbolize water for Legend of Korra, I'm going to pour a bunch of ice into my ramen. Now we have a nice watery flavor. Now what's after earth? That is right. And what's after water? That's right. Earth. So for earth, I've decided, what can you get that's more earthy than potato salad? So we're just going to go ahead and add a little bit of that in there. Just for earth. Now, as we all know, fire is a very strong element. You might not necessarily be able to get all of what you need with just one blast. So we're going to start off with a little bit of medium salsa, all natural, chunky. Just, you want a little bit of heat, but you don't want it to ramp up too much. Then we're going to add in a little blast of Zuko. As you can see, I have a pussy hot sauce. So we're just going to Zuko that up a little bit. Then, to symbolize the balance between all of the elements, I'm going to add in Neapolitan ice cream because, it's got the balance of all the elements. So we're just going to reach in there, chisel it out. Little freezer burn, but that's fine. That's how I like it. And then, finally, we're going to add in some Reese's coffee creamer, to symbolize the chocolate element and to give it a nice little, nice kind of moisture. And then, just to help all of the flavors meld together, we're going to take it right back in with a little bit of air. Alright, now that you've got your Avatar ramen flavors, go ahead and stir that all up. Just so you know, it is still the real stuff. I regret everything I just did there. Let's begin.
This is Season 1's biggest failing. I could go on for ages about this, but I can sum it up in 3 words. Show, don't, tell. And this is one of the worst examples that I've seen in a high fantasy show. From a franchise as acclaimed as Avatar, I never thought that I'd see this bungled up this badly. From the start, we don't see any actual evidence of benders oppressing non-benders. Except, I guess, the gangsters, but they're criminals, and the police come to arrest them in the end anyway. Besides this, we see absolutely no examples of benders oppressing non-benders.
Oh, and he moves in. The old fire enter goes in for the 1-2 knockout in dumbest things he's ever said. Alright, so, yeah, this is going to take a little bit to unpack. So, settle yourselves in, grab your Avatar ramen. Let's start going through this heap of rubble. So to start, yes they do. They show so fucking much how the non-benders are oppressed in so many different fucking ways, okay? Let's start off with the basic premise of perspective for Avatar: The Legend of Korra. You are seeing the non-bender/bender issue through the lens of the bender. This means you are seeing the racial relations through the lens of the oppressor who does not believe that they are the oppressor, who does not know that they are the oppressor, who does not realize that their actions make them the oppressor. Oppressor, 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 oppressor. The one homeless man shown in the series that talks about the rest of the homeless people is a non-bender, as far as we are aware. That is speculation, admittedly. However, all the different factories we see in the series are all powered by benders, which means the non-benders have a lot less jobs that they are able to perform, because if I was an employer, I would always hire the guy with magic versus the guy who just uses his hands, and you know you would too. The benders are oppressed in the workplace. They don't have the same jobs that a bender would. They are oppressed by the sports themselves. There aren't non-bender sports. The sports, all of the popular sports, the only sport that's shown in Legend of Korra, to be fair, and apparently the biggest, popularist one in the world, is domineered by benders. You're not even allowed to play if you're a non-bender. That already excludes non-benders from the workforce and from sports. All right, let's take a look at the council members. Every single council member is a bender. You cannot even become a council member if you are a non-bender from everything that we know about the show. The people who are oppressing the non-benders do not realize this. Let me put it this way. In the 1800s, the white man did not believe he was being racist to the black man because he already believed the black man was just inherently worse. He didn't go around saying, black people suck, I sure love being racist. Instead, he walked around not understanding what the problem was, not understanding that there was a problem. Korra passes a protester and tells them that they're oppressing themselves, when in reality, she has no idea that she's helping contribute to this. Like I brought up earlier, if Tenzin hadn't paid for all that damage, the taxpayers would have, who are mostly the non-benders. If the cops and the gangsters had a large fight in the streets, it'd be the taxpayers paying for the costs to fix it all back up, for the most part. The non-benders have the shittiest jobs. They have no way of getting into the sports. They can't even really be politicians in the city for the most part. Sokka was basically the only non-bender politician that we even get to see, and he's dead. And the only reason he was to begin with was because he was friends with the Avatar. You can't even get onto the special task force if you aren't a metal bender. You can't get into the police force if you're not a bender. You can't even try and serve justice unless you have bending powers because you're inherently weaker than everyone else who serves the force. And yes, you can keep up with a bender if you are a non-bender, but actually think about the people that could in the series. One of them was a sect of incredibly highly trained Kyoshi warriors who dedicated the entirety of their lives to perfecting their martial arts, who could just barely keep up with Zuko's men in the original series. They could just barely handle regular benders. Not even named characters they were getting their asses kicked by. There is no way that you can stand up to a bender. The other non-bender fighting groups, the Archers, defeated by 3 benders. Granted, it was the show's main characters, but it still shows you that even the team of the greatest non-benders in the entire world can be done in by a kid who can blow air out of his fucking nose. There is no way a non-bender can keep up with a bender, but it is not told to us through the lens of the non-bender. We are following the Avatar as she slowly realizes this thing. The non-bender-bender conflict goes on entirely in the background of the show. That is the genius of it. The viewers are not meant to realize it right away. The viewers are meant to sympathize with Korra and think that the non-benders are the bad guys until they give it some thought. I believe that that was the design choice, an incredibly subtle, very rarely tried technique on portraying oppression in a brand new light, in a realistic light from the oppressor's point of view. Even the spiritual leader of the entire world was a bender, the Avatar herself or himself. As far as the gangsters goes, just because they're criminals does not mean they're not oppressors. The cops can't do anything to the triads. If they could have, they would have. The gangsters are openly oppressing non-benders to the point where trying to fight them is almost useless because they can kill you in one shot. There's multiple gangs of organized bending criminals who are basically controlling the city under the cops' noses. The cops are all benders, so they don't even understand the plight of the non-benders. See, this is an oppression versus oppressor's tale that is so masterfully crafted that if they had completely done away with all of the pro-bending besides one game, completely done away with the love triangle, completely done away with Asami's dad, and focused exclusively on this, I think Legend of Korra would have been the greatest show ever made. Period. There is nothing that anybody can say that will change my mind onto the incredible subtlety of how they handled oppression. They took it in the most realistic, dark path that they could possibly get away with. You cannot be in sports. You cannot be in the military effectively. You cannot be a cop. You cannot be in the special task force. You cannot be a politician. You have a higher chance of being homeless. You cannot get the best jobs. You can't even get factory jobs. Cars are used to just barely keep up with the speed that a waterbender or an airbender or an earthbender could move at naturally. Every single possible way, a non-bender is disadvantaged. And that is why, come the end of Book 3, Sokka was pretty much useless in combat. He didn't use his sword to do fuck all. He never fought a named character. He never even got a showdown with Ty Lee with his new sword to show how he'd grown. They realized that the non-benders are almost useless, save for the chi blockers, which the cops have armor specifically to fight. So there is in no way, not one way in the entire show, that the non-benders have it better. But in every single possible imaginable way, it is both shown in the background of the show, in the subtext of it, mind you. A non-bender can never be better than a bender, ever. And that is the way that the show portrays the entire city, but in an incredibly subtle way. This is why I made the video. This is why I made this series. I wanted to get across some points that every single person who's ever reviewed The Legend of Korra that I have ever seen has gotten wrong. And that is the non-bender versus bender issue. It goes over people's heads because they don't step back and look at the subtlety of it all. They don't look deeper beyond the surface level. Sure, at the surface level, they don't give you anything. There's a couple non-benders saying, hey, non-benders are being oppressed. And then there's the Avatar going, no, they're not. I'm going to use my power to stop all the bad guys. But in reality, all this shit is going on under the hood of the show, all in plain view, but it never brings attention to it, because that's not the perspective you're meant to see. I think my rant is over. If I come up with any other points, I will add them at the end of the video. If you disagree with me, fair enough. Please leave a comment. I want to see other interpretations of the non-bender bending issue, because all of these things have an actual place I can point to in the show. A lot of them happen in episode 1. So please, leave a comment and tell me what you think about the non-bender versus bender issue.
We should see non-benders being denied service at stores.
We do. We see them get denied many things. Like I said, we see them getting denied jobs. We see them getting denied places on the special task force. And we see every single non-bender in the entirety of the world and all of its history, no matter whatever happens in the Avatar series, every non-bender is denied being a spiritual leader. They're denied all sorts of representation in politician jobs.
Being denied educations, kids getting teased by other kids, police looking the other way.
They did in the very first episode. The cops never showed up until the battle got their attention. Those criminals were oppressing the non-benders right under their noses, and they couldn't do anything to stop it because it would make all the problems even worse. They do get denied all of this stuff. Mr. Enter, this is strike 3, and I am very close to explaining what that means. But I want you to know that you have hit your 3rd strike.
Yeah, all this is harsh, and it might be uncomfortable to write and watch, but that's kind of the point of tackling the subject matter. In the end, it kind of feels like the non-benders are whining about social problems that they don't have.
3 strikes, Mr. Enter. Strike 1. Holding the power and ability of the Avatar to a degree that no mortal human can ever accomplish, putting them to a level where they should naturally be amazing in every single way. Korra should have been everything from a politician to a negotiator to a battle master to a spiritual goddess at age 16, according to you. This inherently idolizes the Avatar to an unhealthy level, raising her bending and spiritual powers to an unbalanced degree, totally misunderstanding that the Avatar is still a human being with human flaws, further segregating the idea of the Avatar and normal people being similar. Strike 2. Ignoring the visible plight of people in the back in order to further accentuate your own points, and to flat out pretending that they don't exist and that their problems don't exist, to put focus on something else, to ridicule those you disagree with. This further segregates non-benders by making their pleas for help and oppression less visible to your audience, to those you are preaching to. By talking down on all of them, and even the writers, you draw away from everything going on in the background, making non-benders have to be much more vocal in their protests. Strike 3. Saying that their legitimate protests come off as just whining about pointless social issues because you cannot see the bigger picture, ignoring the injustices done to them because you either don't want to see them or literally cannot/have not seen them, because you see everything through the lens of a bender. This forces non-benders to find other ways of getting their message across. 3 strikes, and you're out, Mr. Enter. You have just demonstrated something incredible, something irredeemable if you were a person in the show in Republic City. You have just demonstrated that you are oblivious to all those you would consider under you, but it is not your fault that it is so overt. You are not supposed to see the problems right away. The show was written too well, and you fell into their inadvertent pitfall, natural prejudice against the Avatar's enemies. You are part of the non-bender issue.